My name is Rachel Doyle. I'm 32, and on Christmas night my parents locked me out of their house in the snow and wouldn't let me back in for so much as a coat. I stood on the porch with my purse on my shoulder and nothing else, and through the gap in the door my mother said the thing she'd been saying my whole life. "You can't do anything on your own, Rachel. You're desperate." Behind her, my brother Cody pulled the curtains shut in what used to be my room. The next morning, I drove to the bank to use an old card my grandfather had left me years ago, just hoping for gas money and a cheap motel. The manager swiped it, looked at her screen, and went white. "Ma'am," she whispered. "Please sit down. You need to see this." 48 hours later, my mother wasn't the one giving orders anymore. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the daughter they locked out on Christmas night with nothing but her purse turns out to be the one holding everything they never knew they had. If you've ever been called desperate by the very people who were leaning on you the hardest, stay right here. Because what that bank manager found on her screen changes everything. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I want to clear something up right away, because my mother spent years telling a different version. I was not living in my parents' house because I'd failed at life. 3 months before that Christmas, I'd taken a job as an emergency room nurse at the hospital in my hometown. I'd moved back from the city for it. The apartment I wanted wouldn't be open until February, and my first few hospital paychecks were still clearing, so I asked my parents if I could stay in my old room for a couple of months to save on a deposit. That's it. That's the whole shameful story of my dependence. A grown woman with a full-time job in the hardest department in the building, sleeping in her childhood bedroom for 8 weeks to be smart with money. I'm the kind of person who plans. I've always been the one who handles the crisis without making it about me, because that's literally my job, and it's also just who I am. I don't ask people for things. I figure it out. That sounds like strength. And most days it is. But I've learned it's also the thing that made me an easy target. Because if you never ask for help, the people around you decide you don't need any, and some of them decide that out loud, and a few of them decide it while quietly helping themselves to what's yours. I didn't know that last part yet, that Christmas. I just knew I was a 32-year-old ER nurse being treated like a burden in the house where I grew up, and I couldn't figure out why 2 months of saving money had turned me into the family disappointment. I'd understand soon. It was sitting on a screen at a bank, and it had been there for years. The temperature in that house had a pattern, and the pattern was Cody. My brother is 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was born he was the one my mother worried about, the one she watched, the one the whole house arranged itself around. There was always a reason. He'd been a premature baby. He'd had a hard time in school. He'd lost a job. Then another, then a third. And every setback became more evidence that Cody needed protecting, while I, who handled my own setbacks without an audience, became evidence of something else. I became proof that some children just don't need their parents. My mother said it like a compliment and meant it like a dismissal. "Oh, Rachel's fine. Rachel can take care of herself," she'd say, waving me off like a fly, while she cleared a path through the world for my brother. Those first weeks back home, I watched it up close for the first time as an adult. Cody, 28, unemployed again, getting his car payment handled. Cody getting a check pressed into his hand at the dinner table. And me, the working nurse, getting reminded that I was lucky they were letting me stay. One night my mother said it plainly, the first small version of the line that would eventually define everything. I'd offered to help with something, money for groceries since I was eating their food, and she patted my hand and said, "Don't worry about it. You can barely take care of yourself. You can't do anything on your own anyway." I let it go. I always let it go. I was good at letting things go, which, it turns out, is exactly the quality a thief looks for in a victim. The card in my purse came from my grandfather, my mother's father, Leo Marsh. Pop Leo, I called him. He died 6 years ago, but he gave me that card 14 years before that, on the day I graduated high school. I want to tell you about that day, because it turned out to matter more than anything else in my life. He took me out for pie, just the two of us, and he slid an envelope across the diner table. Inside was a debit card with my name on it, attached to an account he'd opened for me, and he'd put a real amount in it to start. Enough to mean something. He told me it was for my future, for school, for emergencies, for the day I'd need to stand on my own 2 feet. And then he did something I didn't understand at 18. He took a paper napkin, wrote on it, folded it into a little square, and tucked it behind the card in my wallet. "Keep this with the card," he said. "Don't read it now. Read it the day you need it." Then he looked at me, dead serious, and added one thing out loud. "And Rachel, don't tell your mother about this account. She'll spend it." I laughed, because I was 18, and I thought he was being a grumpy old man about his own daughter. I tucked the napkin away and mostly forgot about it. I used the account a little in college, then less, then not at all, once I had a nurse's salary. Years went by. The card went soft and scratched in the bottom of my wallet, just an old thing I never threw away. I had no idea I was carrying a loaded weapon and a warning, folded into a square, the whole time. Pop Leo died 6 years ago, and my mother handled everything. She was his power of attorney near the end, when his health went, and after he passed, she managed the estate, the accounts, the paperwork, all of it. I was 26 and grieving and living in the city, and I was glad someone was handling it, and that someone was his daughter, so why would I question it? At the funeral, I asked her, gently, whether Pop had left anything, any little keepsake or note, because he'd been the one person who really saw me. And my mother looked me right in the eye and said, "Oh, honey, your grandfather didn't have much at the end. There wasn't really anything to leave. Don't go getting your hopes up about an inheritance." I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was my mother, standing at her own father's funeral, and the idea that she would lie to me, there then, about that, never entered my head. So I let go of the thought of any gift from Pop Leo. I had my memories and a scratched-up old debit card I assumed had long since been closed or emptied, and that was enough. I never checked the account. Why would I? I'd been told there was nothing, and I had no reason on earth to doubt the woman who told me. That single sentence at the funeral, "There wasn't really anything to leave," was the cornerstone of everything that came after. It was the lie that kept me from looking, and it worked for 6 years, because the most effective lies aren't the ones that scare you off. They're the ones that gently tell you there's nothing worth looking at, so you simply stop looking. I stopped looking. She counted on it. Living back in that house, 3 months before Christmas, I started noticing money I couldn't explain. Cody didn't work. Not steadily, but Cody had things. A newer truck appeared in the driveway. His old debts, the ones my mother used to whisper about, seemed to evaporate. There was a vacation, a deposit on an apartment for him and his fiancée, a watch. I'm not nosy by nature, but I'm an ER nurse, and the job trains you to notice when the story doesn't match the chart. The story was that my parents were comfortable but careful, retirees on a fixed income. The chart was a 28-year-old with no job buying a truck. One evening, I asked, lightly, just curious, "Where's Cody getting the money for all this?" My mother's face did something I'd see again later, a quick flicker before the smooth mask came back. "That's family business, Rachel," she said. "It's being handled." It's being handled. I let it go, because that's what I do, but it lodged somewhere in the back of my mind, a small wrong note. I even thought once, idly, that I should look at my own old account from Pop Leo someday, just to close it out properly. But I had no way to check my parents' finances, no access to my mother's accounts, nothing to investigate. The wrongness was just a feeling, and feelings aren't evidence, and I had a demanding job and an exit plan and no real reason to start a war over a flicker on my mother's face. So I filed it away with everything else I'd let go. The truck, the watch, the flicker. I'd connect them all eventually, sitting in a chair at a bank, watching a stranger turn pale. But not yet. In early December, my mother announced the plan that would put me on a porch in the snow. Cody and his fiancée, Betrayal, were going to move in. They needed a place while they got on their feet, which in Cody's case was a permanent address, and the place they needed was my room. The room I was paying nothing for, technically, but the room I'd been promised through February. My mother delivered it like good news. "It just makes more sense, Rachel. You're so independent, you'll land on your feet anywhere. Cody and Brielle really need the stability." There it was again, my competence weaponized against me. Cody's helplessness earned him a home. My capability earned me an eviction. I tried to be reasonable. I explained the apartment wasn't ready until February, that I just needed the 8 weeks, that I'd be out the second I could. My mother's face hardened in a way I didn't fully clock at the time. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Looking back, I understand why she was so eager to get me out of the house, and it had nothing to do with Cody needing a room. I was getting too close. I was in the house, noticing the trucks and the watches and the money that didn't add up, asking light little questions that were getting less light. A daughter who never visits can't notice anything. A daughter sleeping down the hall might. She needed me gone before I started actually looking, and Christmas gave her the excuse. I didn't know that yet. I just thought my mother was choosing my brother over me one more time, which was true, but it was so much smaller than the truth. The truth needed a bank to tell it. Christmas dinner was a performance, and I was cast as the cautionary tale. The table was full, aunts and uncles and cousins, and my mother spent the meal narrating Cody's bright future, the engagement, the apartment, the fresh start. When the conversation drifted to me, it drifted down, the way it always did. "Rachel's still finding herself," my mother told the table, "though I had a job and a plan and a pension. We're letting her stay with us while she sorts things out." Letting her stay? Sorts things out. I sat there in my scrubs-adjacent good sweater and ate my dinner and said nothing, because making a scene at Christmas would only prove her point. After dessert, my father disappeared into the den, which is what my father does when something hard is about to happen, and my mother followed me into the kitchen. "We think it's best if you go tonight," she said. Just like that. Tonight. Christmas night. I asked if she was serious, if I could at least stay until morning, pack my things properly. "Cody and Brielle are coming in the morning," she said, "and honestly, Rachel, the longer you drag this out, the harder you make it. You can't keep leaning on us. You need to learn to do things on your own." I went to get my bags, and she stopped me. Said they'd send my things along later, that I should just go, that I was making it a production. So I left with my purse and my coat in my hand, and nothing else. My mother stood in the doorway with the warm light behind her and said it, the whole sentence, the one I'll hear in my head forever. "You can't do anything on your own, Rachel. You're desperate." Then she shut the door, and I heard the lock turn. I sat in my car in their driveway for a while, engine running for the heat, snow filling in the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. But I'm an ER nurse, and the job has taught me one genuinely useful thing. When everything goes wrong at once, you don't get to fall apart. You triage. So I triaged. I had maybe $60 cash, a quarter tank of gas, and a credit card near its limit from moving expenses. I needed a place to sleep that wasn't a parking lot. I went through my wallet under the dome light, looking for anything, and my fingers found the old card. Pop Leo's card, soft-edged, the numbers half worn off. And tucked behind it, a little folded square of paper I hadn't looked at in 14 years. I didn't open the napkin that night. I was too tired, too cold, too close to crying. But I held that card and I thought, maybe there's $20 left on it. Maybe there's enough for a motel. My mother had said Pop left nothing, and I'd believed her for 6 years. So I wasn't expecting a miracle. I was expecting bus fare. I found a cheap motel off the highway, paid cash for one night, and lay awake deciding that first thing in the morning, I'd take that old card to the bank and see if my dead grandfather could buy me one more night indoors. That decision changed my entire life. The bank was a small credit union on Main Street, the kind with one teller window and a manager's desk in the open. I got there when it opened, running on no sleep and motel coffee. I slid the old card across the counter to the teller and gave an embarrassed little laugh. "This is really old?" I said. "It might be closed. I just want to check the balance. Maybe take out whatever's on it." The teller swiped it, frowned, swiped it again. Then she said, "Let me get my manager," in a voice that made my stomach drop, because I know that voice. It's the voice nurses use in the hallway when they don't want to say the bad thing in front of the patient. The manager came over, a calm woman named Joan Pruitt, and she sat down at her desk and pulled up the account, and I watched her face change. She read something, scrolled, read more. The color went out of her cheeks. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. Then she lowered her voice the way you do when you're about to hand someone news that's going to hurt. "Ma'am," she said, "please sit down. You need to see this." I sat. My heart was doing the thing it does in a trauma bay, that slow, heavy pounding. I thought, here it comes. The account's been drained. There's nothing. My mother was right. I'm overdrawn somehow. This is the final humiliation of the worst week of my life. I braced for empty. What Joan turned the monitor to show me was not empty. It was full of activity. Years of it. And not one transaction in that long scrolling list had been made by me. Here is what was on the screen. The account my grandfather opened for me. The one my mother swore at his funeral didn't exist. The one I'd assumed was empty or closed. Was still open. Still in my name. And it had been used as a piggy bank for years. There was a long history of withdrawals and transfers, dozens of them, going back well before Pop Leo died and continuing for years after. Regular amounts, sometimes large ones, and the transfers had a destination, listed right there in the bank's record, going to an account belonging to Sharon Doyle. My mother, the grandfather who'd handed me a card and a warning, had also put far more into that account over the years than I ever knew, building something for me, and my mother had been quietly bleeding it out the whole time. The balance remaining was a fraction of what the deposits and interest should have grown to. I sat there in that chair and I did the thing the job trained me to do. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I asked questions. "These withdrawals," I said to Joan, keeping my voice level. "I didn't make any of these. Who authorized them?" Joan pulled up more detail, and her careful answer told me everything. For years, the access had been tied to a power of attorney, an old authorization from my grandfather's affairs. "But Ms. Doyle," she said slowly, "this account is in your name. You're the owner. And these transactions, especially the more recent ones, the ones after the date you're telling me your grandfather passed away." She stopped. She didn't have to finish. I understood. The woman who called me desperate, who couldn't take care of myself, who needed to learn to stand on my own, had been standing partly on my money for years. If you've ever been called useless by the very people who were quietly leaning on you, you know the cold feeling that went through me in that chair. Stay with me, because this turns, and it turns, legally. Comment "I see it" if you've felt this, and subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Joan Pruitt was kind, and she was precise, and she walked me through it like a professional, which is exactly what I needed. The account was mine, she confirmed, solely mine. My grandfather had set it up that way, with me as the owner. My mother had been an authorized user or had access through her power of attorney over my grandfather's separate affairs, and somewhere along the way, that access had bled into an account that was never hers to touch. "Here's what I'd recommend," Joan said. "We can print your full statement history. You'll want to review every transaction and identify which ones you didn't authorize, and given the pattern and the dates, you may want to file a fraud claim and speak with an attorney. Some of these transactions may be recoverable." Recoverable. I held on to that word. I asked her to print everything, every page, going back as far as the system held. While the printer ran, I sat very still and let the ER nurse in me take over from the daughter. The daughter wanted to drive to my parents' house and put my fist through that locked door. The nurse made a list. Get the statements. Identify the fraud. Find a lawyer. Document everything. Stay calm, because the calm person in the crisis is the one who controls it. By the time Joan handed me a thick stack of warm paper, I wasn't a desperate woman who'd been thrown out in the snow anymore. I was a creditor building a case. Sitting in that motel room with the statement spread across the bed, I finally understood the whole machine my mother had built. It started with the lie at the funeral. There wasn't really anything to leave. That sentence wasn't grief. It was a lock on a door. As long as I believed Pop Leo had left nothing, I'd never check the account. And as long as I never checked, she could keep drawing from it. And she had the means, because near the end of his life, she'd been my grandfather's power of attorney, handling his money, his bills, his accounts. That authority was real while he was alive. But here's the thing I learned, the thing that turned my whole case from a family grievance into a legal one. A power of attorney ends the moment the person dies. The instant Pop Leo passed, any authority my mother had through that document was gone, completely, in every state, no exceptions. Every withdrawal she made after his death wasn't a gray area or a family loan, it was unauthorized. And the account she was pulling from wasn't even his. It was mine. So she'd taken money that belonged to me, using an authority that had died with her father for years, while telling me I couldn't take care of myself. The audacity of it actually steadied me. There's a clarity that comes when cruelty turns out to be that clean, that documented, that provable. I wasn't dealing with a feeling anymore, a flicker on a face, a wrong note. I was dealing with a paper trail, and a paper trail is something an ER nurse who charts everything knows exactly how to respect. I stacked the statements neatly. I circled the transactions after the date of my grandfather's death. And then I reached for my wallet, because there was one piece of evidence I still hadn't read. I took the little folded napkin out from behind the old card, the one Pop Leo had tucked there 14 years ago and told me not to read until the day I needed it. The paper had gone soft and yellow, the folds nearly worn through, but his handwriting was still there, that careful slanted print I'd know anywhere. I want you to hold these words in your mind for the rest of this story, because my grandfather wrote them when I was 18 years old, and he knew. He knew. For when you have to stand on your own, it read, "This is yours, Rachel. Nobody else's. Don't tell your mother about it, because she'll spend it, and she'll have a good reason every time. Some people love you and steal from you in the same breath. Protect yourself. Love, Grandpa Leo." I sat on the edge of that motel bed and I read it 3 times, and the third time my hands were steady. He'd warned me on a folded napkin when I was 18. I just never believed my own mother was the warning. He'd known his own daughter well enough to predict, 14 years in advance, exactly what she would do, and he'd tried to build a wall around me with a debit card and a paper napkin and a secret. The only thing he'd gotten wrong was thinking I'd read the note in time. I hadn't. I'd trusted her instead, the way children do, right up until she locked me out in the snow. But here's what mattered. The note wasn't just heartbreak. It was evidence of intent. It proved the account was meant for me alone, that my grandfather had explicitly excluded my mother, that there was nothing accidental or family about the money she'd been taking. Pop Leo, 6 years dead, had reached out of the ground and handed me the cornerstone of my case. I folded the napkin back up gently, and I put it somewhere safe. I was going to need it, and I was finally, fully done being told what I couldn't do on my own. I need to be clear about what this was and what it wasn't, because it matters to me that you understand I didn't win a lottery. This was not a windfall. Nobody handed me a fortune at the dramatic moment. What that bank screen showed me was a robbery, mine, in progress for years, and everything that happened next was me clawing back what was already legally mine. The money in that account was money my grandfather had given me, on purpose,